I love sci-fi movies. One of my favorite sci-fi movies is the 2016 movie Passengers, starring Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt. One thing that was said in the movie which I love so much and which is like one of my favorite quotes of all time is, if you live an ordinary life, all you have are ordinary stories. Stories, a story, that's what it's all about. Stories are basically how we do everything that we do in our world today. Stories are how we teach, lead, instruct, inform, engage, excite, entertain, market, sell, create, innovate, invent, and gossip. It was someone who said that even medicine starts with storytelling. The patient tells a story about the illness. The doctor tells a story to understand the illness, while science, on the other hand, tells a story to explain the disease or to explain the illness. Recognizing and harnessing the power of a story, this is one thing that real high performers do. All leaders from all spheres, from religious to business to political, recognize the power of a story and are usually great storytellers. Jesus spoke in parables. Krishna and Rama came to life in the stories that they told. The Torah, the very first 5 books of the Old Testament, is not a boring list of rules, but a set of moral lessons intertwined in engaging life stories. Isn't it interesting that just say these 2 words, good Samaritan, and immediately everybody gets the message? People remember the principle because they loved the story. It just goes to show you how powerful stories really are. And that's what it is, that if we are going to take our lives to a whole new level, it's about recognizing the power of stories. In the very first episode of this No Excuses video series, I talked about the power of stories in terms of why we do what we do as high performers. In this particular episode, I'll be talking about the power of stories in terms of what we do as high performers. Just like that passenger quote said, if we are going to have extraordinary stories, then we need to live extraordinary lives. And to live an extraordinary life is to have an extraordinary story to share. It's really like the chicken and the egg situation, but where both are of high value, both are of high importance. And so it boils down to this: change your life, change your story. Change your story, change your life. 4 basic ideas, 4 basic reasons why stories are so important in terms of what we do. Number 1, grace and intention. Here's what happens. As high performers, what we are basically doing is to do the creative best that we can with our lives. And to do that is to be intentional, to be deliberate about creating, crafting, and writing our own unique stories. And no-brainer when we discover that, hey, we are the ones writing our own unique stories, we realize that we need to be intentional, we need to be deliberate about the way we live our lives. We no longer see ourselves as spectators. We realize that we are active participants, we are actors. We hold the power, we determine the narrative. And trust me, there is nothing as graceful, as empowering as having a thought like that. That we do not take the back seat, we are the drivers of our lives. Now, someone might say that, Kayode, if you say that, then where is the place of faith and where is the place of God? Well, high performers realize that when it comes to faith, there is no faith except that which we make for ourselves. And God has done the most wonderful thing ever, and that's to set eternity in the hearts of men. Now, what does that mean? That simply means that every dream, every desire, every hope, every expectation, every ambition that we feel and have, which has nothing to do with dominating another human being, was placed in there by God, but requires our cooperation for it to find expression. And that's why at the end of the day, the responsibility is on us. Number 2 reason why stories are so powerful is because they are the key. They are an important tool to communicate ideas and concepts in our world today. Now think about it. Every important idea or concept you can imagine has been communicated, or is usually communicated with a story. Stories are how we persuade, how we get what we want. Because we realize that as leaders, communication is the lifeblood of what we do. And one way to make that communication effective is by wrapping it in a great, wonderful, and beautiful story. Think about it. That animation, that movie, that book, that speech, that sermon, that keynote that made an impression on you, that made an impact, that got you fired up, that inspired you, that brought about change in your life, probably happened because it was wrapped in a great and a beautiful and wonderful story. Now the flip side is, think of that one time that you made an impression on somebody, be it a family member, be it your colleague at work, or anywhere you could possibly imagine. That one time, or those several times you made an impression on somebody, it probably happened because that person could relate, could identify with your struggle, could identify with your story. That's why stories are so powerful. Number 3 reason why stories are so powerful is because it's the key to our uniqueness. It's what makes us unique. Now think about it. Just when the world, every one of us feels like we have seen our fair share, we have seen all that we can see in terms of actors, writers, singers, comedians, inventors, scientists, someone comes up, blows our mind, and we are like, where have you been all our lives? We have been waiting for you. Here's your space in the world. Come and take your space. Now, this is the same person that probably where he was starting out, everyone would have told him, look, don't bother. We already have enough actors, we already have enough writers, enough singers, enough entertainers, enough inventors, enough writers and poets. But then he comes up and everybody sees him for who he is. I like the way J.K. Rowling puts it. She says, there will always be room in the world for a story that can transport people to another world. What it simply tells us is that there may not be room for another ordinary comedian or another ordinary writer or ordinary speaker, but there will always be room for a comedian who has a story, albeit his own unique story. That no matter how similar that comedian may seem, no matter how similar even their story may seem, people have never heard their own version of that particular story, and that's why there will always be room for them. And finally, but in no way the least reason why stories are so important is that stories are powerful for creating lasting change, If we are going to change the world, then we need to change our stories. It was Chimamanda Adichie that said that stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, and stories have been used to rebuild and to empower. Just like stories have been used to destroy human dignity, those same stories have been used to restore and to rebuild human dignity. Think about that word, destroy. Destroy. It's made up of two things, de and stroy. De and story. So destroy is simply the story. And think about the other word, restore. It's simply made up of two things, restore, and story. So just like how stories can be used to destroy, stories can be used to restore. Just like stories can be used to bring down, stories can be used to rebuild. Just think about it. This is why people who have been traumatized are usually encouraged to do what? To share their stories. In the process of sharing their stories and listening to the stories of other people, what happens? The healing process begins to take place. Just like they went through a bad story that affected them negatively, a retelling of that story in another light and listening to the stories of other people who have survived and come out of similar situations and have come out stronger helps to rebuild and helps to restore. And this is why stories are so powerful. You know, recognizing and harnessing the power of a story was what led me to running the 2020 Lagos City Marathon. You know, it was all about me being intentional and being deliberate about my life. It was about challenging myself to do something I'd never done before, finding a way to communicate my ideas and concepts of high performance and living a life of no excuses, finding a way to distinguish myself and to create change in my life and ultimately the lives of others. That was what running the 2020 Lagos City Marathon was all about for me. I remember one day while running on the road during the 6 months of preparation for the marathon, this voice floats in my head. You know, I'm running on the road, drenched in sweat, gasping for air, throwing out spit just to get little moisture for my parched lips and throat, and nursing a very terrible blister on my toe, and just asking myself, who sent you work, Kayode? As in, who in the world sent you this assignment? And you know, it was at that particular moment on one of those days that this gentle voice floats in my head and says, Kayode, every tear, sweat, blood and spit is making up that ink that is creating and writing your unique and beautiful story. That unique and beautiful story about challenging yourself to do something you have never done before. That unique story about doing all you can, doing the creative best that you can with your own life. And that's what it's all about. That's why we do all that we can do. That's why we let go of the excuses and we pursue, we push ahead to go after those life-changing and life-altering goals. Why? Because of what's at stake. And what's at stake is our unique and beautiful and wonderful story. If we don't go after those life-altering goals, that story will not get written. That story will not get told. And it's very important for us to have that extraordinary story to live an extraordinary life. You know, if we're really going to be those high performers that God has created us to be, it's helpful to remember that there is no agony greater than bearing an untold story, and that to be human, to be a person, is to have a story, to have a unique and beautiful story to tell. And that those people who have no power over their story, who have no power to retell it, to remix it, to break it up, put it back again, to make fun about that story, to change it as time keeps changing, are really people who are powerless because they have no unique thoughts of their own. You have your own unique story. You have your own beautiful story. Write it, live it.